From South Bend, Indiana, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
And my dad, like I said, my dad was a welder, right? So he's a blue collar guy, was in the trade for probably close to 35 years. And as I was getting ready to graduate from college with that initial degree, his advice was, don't forget that just because you have a piece of paper saying you're an engineer doesn't mean you know anything, right? Like the guy that's operating the machine or that's been working in that trade and doing the work for however long may not have a degree, but he knows that equipment, he knows that process way better than you do. And so
that was Andy Davis. Andy spent most of his 19 years with the Army working in and around manufacturing technology in the Defense Industrial Base. In his role with the Department of Defense, Andy was part of the team that responded to the White House call to establish the Manufacturing USA Institutes, championed initial Army and eventual DoD-wide added manufacturing technology roadmaps, and convened key Army AM leaders to form the Army's AM community practice, all leading to a more coordinated and collaborative strategy behind the Army's advanced manufacturing investments. His last position with the DoD prior to joining TBGA was as the Deputy Director and Chief Technology Officer of the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment program. Before we get started, head over to www.3degreescompany.com and subscribe to the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the show anywhere you download your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or Stitcher. Also, if you or your company are looking for materials, qualification, or data management software, reach out to the team through our website or via email at info@3degreescompany.com. We can get into it. All right, Andy, thanks so much for joining the show today. Excited for the conversation. I think we'll hit on a number of different topics, but like I do with all of my guests, I think we like to get a sense of the person and kind of the true background. So where'd you grow up? What were some of those early years like? And was manufacturing ever on your radar kind of back when you were a little bit younger than you are these days?
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to join the show and to have the chat. I grew up in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, just west of the city. My dad was a welder. So growing up in a house where he's doing that as a profession and, shade tree mechanic on the side and general handyman all around. Like I had a great kind of environment to play around with and learning about, being curious about how things are made and how they're put together, because you got to take them apart to fix them. And so we had a very fantastic environment for that. My mom was a nurse, and so combined like this awesome appreciation for how things work and how they're made with a bit of a compassion and appreciation for humanity and the nursing side, I think has given me a solid foundation to truly appreciate now in 20 years of working in the manufacturing industry, the combination of the people aspect and the technology aspect. And so I think that's foundational in terms of, did I ever see myself going in this direction? I think probably if I think hard enough about that, yeah, like I grew up taking stuff apart. I grew up working on cars, and my dad had an old car in the garage that we'd mess around with, and I grew up doing demolition derbies and figuring out how to make something last for 15-20 minutes in a very destructive environment, and how do you fix it again for the next race the next day, and so on. So I think probably yes is the answer. Did I think I'd be doing what I'm doing now? No. Like I never could have scripted any of this, and so I think that's kind of fun to think on. But it's great. I love being in this environment, love being part of the manufacturing industry. My mind, I think, works that way. I look at something and wonder how it's made. So I think but it's been a good place to be for a long time.
Do you have a favorite class in high school?
I really liked my high school physics class. I think that was probably I'd say high school physics was, probably my favorite class. Well, I'll back off that. So metal shop and wood shop were my favorite classes. My school had a really, really nice metal shop and nice wood shop. We had a sand foundry, we had a welding station, we had sheet metal activities and machining and all that stuff. And so I think that was probably super foundational for taking like this idea that you can rip something apart and fit it back together in a very rough way for the demolition derby side to like actually precisely machining something, or seeing it form into from liquid metal, from aluminum cans that we brought in and melted down into a shape and then machine it, and so on. I think that was good. The physics class brought together probably the science aspect of the physical world. I like that, and then I actually like history a lot. So I enjoyed my American history classes, probably are my top ones.
You're a mechanical engineer, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what I mean, I hear some of the roots of that. Was there anything specific that made you go down the mechanical engineer path?
Yeah, I remember sitting down in high school with my mom, and she's like, "What do you think you want to study in college, or what do you want to be?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Like I just like being outside banging sticks together and and playing hockey, which is basically banging sticks together." So I we talked through like, do you want to be a doctor? No. Do you want to be a banker in business? No, not really. Like, what about engineering? That sounds interesting. What is that? And so as I started kind of peeling back the layers on the different types of engineering disciplines you could pursue, mechanical just seemed to resonate. It was no pun intended, I guess, on that. But it was a natural fit, I think, from the way that I kind of see things. Like, I appreciate electrical engineers massively, but it's magic to me. I can't visualize it, and so I struggle to like go down that rabbit hole very far. And mechanical things just click. I have that's a natural fit for me, I think. And so that was that. I looked at plastics engineering a little bit. Penn State has a pretty good program for that, so I considered that for a little bit, but ended up going down the path of mechanical. Partly because I think it's a jack of all trades type degree that you can use for a lot of different things, and I don't find myself to be a specialist in much, but more of a generalist, and so it just seems to fit, all the way along.
And as you kind of were pursuing the mechanical engineering, it is kind of that jack of all trades. So as you get to a decision point, once you're wrapping that up or thinking about kind of what do you do afterwards, where was your head at?
I always saw myself in the automotive industry, actually. I always thought I would go automotive just because I like cars. I like the mechanical aspect of them, and so I felt like that was probably the path I would go. When I graduated, that path did not open up to me, and so I was actually going to join the military after college, after about 4 or 5 months of not having a job right out of school. The Air Force was looking attractive, and I knew I could go in and be an engineer in that community. And a friend of mine was working for the Army at the time at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, guy that I had gone to college with, and we just connected, chatting about life. And he asked me to send me my resume and send him my resume, which I did. And a few weeks later, I had an interview, and a month later, I had a job offer. And it took me still to the military, but not as an enlisted individual in the Air Force, rather as a civilian employee with the Army. So that was a new adventure that I wasn't expecting. Totally, again, unscripted kind of approach. And but man, it took me on a wild ride.
What were you doing? What was that first job?
Yeah, the first job was working with what the military calls collective protection systems. So I was working in the Army's chemical and biological center, they call it. It's a research development organization that helps develop new and maintain the engineering for existing chemical and biological protection related things. And so I had a position in the collective protection group, which sets up, has tents that are overpressurized to keep bad stuff out, has filtration systems to, keep the bad stuff out and provide clean air. And so I was working in that as a tracking down, how much lead was in the filtrations, the media and filtration system, or the paint that was on the filtration system that was designed and made 40 years prior to me working there. So very like detailed, get in the weeds of these sustainment activities. It wasn't terribly exciting, which is fine, or busy. So I taught myself how to use SolidWorks in the process, and quickly transitioned then out of that group to a couple different groups, and ended up in a group called the advanced design and manufacturing team within that organization that's basically a prototyping group. And so we were taking good ideas directly from soldiers and Marines and others that were, in the midst of the mid 2000s activities in Afghanistan and Iraq, and creating prototypes and coming up with solutions to solve their problems. That was on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is just designing and building prototype test fixtures for the lab to be able to do interesting things, the scientists to be able to do their jobs.
And I mean, the Army is a massive organization, right? So with that problem you just described, right, where you're getting feedback from the soldiers to solve problems, how does that work in real life? Like, is there someone on the other end of the phone that just calls you up and they got your number and say, "Hey, we need this"? Like, how does that actually work? Is there like a bunch of pool of ideas that, hey, we need this fixed, or is it more tactical that, like, hey, General so and so is struggling with this? What is that like? And I've heard it described in these additive manufacturing circles, but I'm curious from your perspective of, like, what is the actual communication like on that?
Yeah, it's all the above. So there's not one specific pathway for that. We were working with a group that doesn't exist anymore. It's an internal Army group called the Rapid Equipping Force. And the Rapid Equipping Force had a mission to quickly solve problems today. And they were very focused on what was happening in Southwest Asia. And so they had funding and they had connectivity into real problems that soldiers were experiencing. And they had folks that were out kind of working with those operational units, asking questions, trying to figure out what the problem was, and then coming back to groups like ours with those problems and saying, "We have this challenge, can you come up with an answer?" And so we were, not too removed from the actual operational units that were needing the thing. So we'd have we'd come up with a budget and a timeline, and it's classic, just a project approach to it, and say, here's what we think it's going to take, and we'd get the green light to go, and then turn that around. So an example of like one was, there was the Buffalo, the big Buffalo vehicle. It's a mine resistant ambush protected vehicle. So it was in one of the Transformers movies. If you remember the Transformers movie where the Decepticons are driving down the road and there's a truck with a big crane arm chucking cars out of the way. That's the Buffalo. So that crane arm was used, the soldiers would use that, and the Marines would use that to drive down a road, and on the end of the crane arm was a spork. It was just a fork. And they'd use it to interrogate like a suspicious looking pile of trash on the side of the road, or if they were digging, they see a pothole that's been freshly filled in that wasn't filled in yesterday. They're looking for roadside bombs and things that were going to cause problems. And so they had a need to grab things with that arm, and the spork wouldn't let them grab it. It was kind of like holding a piece of corn on the cob with a fork. It's just going to roll all over them. So they wanted a claw. So we designed a claw and came up with a claw that could just integrate right into the existing system, gave full 360-degree continuous revolution, so they could pick it up, maneuver it, look at it. Is it a thing that matters? Is it a thing that doesn't matter? Either way, get it out of the way and keep going. And so we had 6 months probably to come up with an answer for that, and actually design it, build it, test it, prototype it. We had some Marines that had been recently deployed to Iraq and or Afghanistan, I forget which, come back. And one of the first things they did was sent them up to our shop, and they took a look at it, gave us feedback on the design. Came back a couple of weeks later, we had a prototype for them to play with. I was out in a field the night before digging holes and burying trash in the field for them to come just dig up and try it out. And then we ended up sending a bunch of them over to Afghanistan. It was Afghanistan we were working with. And so we built them in-house, we created them, we sent them over. I had 2 engineers that went over and helped install them on trucks. And it wasn't like a complete design change or a complete fielding back through the actual program office within the Army, but it was an initial capability demonstration that, if they wanted more, they could have, rolled it back through that program office. And so it was definitely soldier driven. It wasn't like a general, hey, I need this. It wasn't a requirements level thing that came out of the Army's requirements process. It was very much on the ground, up, bottoms up approach.
And was 3D printing on the radar at that time, or were you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We used it to do the quick like design iterations. And so we, whenever we had the first set of Marines come in and tell us about the problem, we have an artist there who is quickly capturing a sketch of what he thought made sense based on the conversation. Show it to them. They'd say, yeah, that's good. No, don't do this. That would, that's a bad idea because whatever. We would go take those, do the design, had a couple of different iterations of the design. We'd use just an SLA process. We had a polymer system there, and we could quickly come up with a handheld prototype that the different types of claw ideas or claw ideas. And then next time the Marines came through, we showed them that, and they came up with different ideas even then based on what they saw physically. So we didn't use additive for actual like prototypes at scale, but it was very much in the design aspect of quick turn, like iterate. Okay, go build something out of metal now.
And was that on the like? Did that ever kind of in your mind like rise above any of the other technologies you were using? Like, hey, like I really see the potential of this technology, or like this is really interesting new capability that I want to dig into more, or is it just, hey, it's another tool that we're going to use we got in the lab, and it's not necessarily something you're going to specialize in or kind of drive into a specific kind of career path?
Yeah, I saw it as a great tool. I thought it was awesome. We used it for had other projects I'd use it for too. Our shop there was primarily polymer. I don't think we had any metal machines at the time. They do now. Um, so it's to me it was a great design tool and a great prototyping tool. And it was not yet, at least at that phase, it wasn't yet something that I was like, we need to drive this forward, and this is my future.
Yeah.
And so it was very much you know, it's cool. I love welding. I love sheet metal. I love machining. I love additive. It's
Yeah.
just it's all part of how do you solve the problem? What's the right tool for solving the problem?
Yeah. And so what was the next step in your career path kind of after you spent some time doing a lot of this
Yeah,
problem solving with the Army and making new devices?
yeah. I had so that project was winding down. The clock project was winding down, and I had an email come across that asked if anybody's interested to take a 1 year developmental assignment, uh, helping manage an R&D program at our headquarters organization, to respond to the email. And so that was all set. It didn't have any details on any of that. Google wasn't very helpful. In this was 2010, and so I wrote back and said, I'm interested if you can tell me more. And the next day, the division chief came by and said, "Congratulations, you got the job." And so, what does that mean? So I moved into from there. I jumped up then to run the Army's manufacturing technology program, and the Mantech is what we called it. And it's one the Navy, the Air Force, Defense Logistics Agencies, and others have their own Mantech programs, and it's a investment program that the Army has that is focused on maturing manufacturing alongside of technology maturation. And so, greatest prototype in the world, greatest idea in the world is just a great idea unless you can make it at scale from an Army perspective, unless you can make it at scale and make it affordably. And so the program really existed to do that. And so that like opened my eyes up even more to this manufacturing space, and not just not just quick turn prototypes and best effort, kind of thumb in the wind almost sometimes, or my demolition derby experiences were all that, right? Is like, how do we solve this one thing right now, not worry about long term doing it over and over again. The Mantic program allowed me a chance to really see like how we make stuff matters in the process of making it, the specifications, the skill sets, the facilities, the infrastructure, like all this stuff really matters. And so I spent 7 years running the Mantech program and doing everything from, projects that related to applying insect repellent to fabric before it's cut into uniforms, to, new next generation armor capabilities where you're sandwiching ceramic tiles inside of titanium honeycombs, and, to um, ceramic matrix composites for jet engines, to, it was all over the place. Fantastic. Like I got to see the breadth of the stuff that the Army deals with. I got to work with organizations across the Department of Defense and across the industry and academia to help drive these things forward. And it was fantastic. So I stayed 7 years because I couldn't figure out what else I wanted to do. Like there was nothing else that I could come up with in my head that was going to be better than this, because it was just such a amazing job. And it was great. Got to, in that time, that community, myself and the other leaders of the Mantech programs across the Defense Department, got the call from the White House ultimately, but it came down through the Office of Secretary of Defense to stand up what is now known as Manufacturing USA and all the institutes. And so it came in through the OSD Mantech director at the time, Adele Radcliffe, came into one of our meetings and said, "We've got to go do this. Let's figure it out." And that birthed America Makes, and then quickly after that, Lift, and then DMDI, now MXD, and the succession of institutes that have come out since then. And so, got to be at the very like front end, basement level of what's now America Makes, and help kick that off. Got to help drive more on the MXD side or DMDI side. What that was, I didn't do a lot with Lift. And help get this thing going. It was amazing. And so it's super fun to be, continuing to be part of that now, and see how those have come along. I brought America Makes back into the Army to drive a additive manufacturing technology roadmap with the Army, and then we took that and broadened that out. All the other services did the same, and then we collectively did a DoD level additive manufacturing technology roadmap. I think that was probably around 2016 we published that. So started to get more involved in the additive space, and I had all these people across the Army coming to me with their good ideas about why we should fund additive stuff with the Mantech program, and there was no strategy. There was no consistent approach to it. It was just like the good idea fairy popped up here, and here, and they were all disconnected. And so so that road mapping activity is really the response to that, which is like, what are we really doing here? Like, what does the Army need? How does the Army need to think about additive? What does it need to be doing? And that really came up again, a bit of a bottoms up approach through the Mantech program initially, and then with a lot of support from across the Army's research and development community to drive forward with a strategy or a roadmap anyway, technical roadmap that says here's things that we need to do. We need to mature the machines, the materials, the people, these other bits that are all related to that. That led to the Army actually putting together, we had a 4-star general, General Perna, who was the leader of the Army Materiel Command at the time. He said, I want to own additive because I'm the one that owns all the equipment and all the sustainment of everything in the Army. And I see this as an amazing way to help, make sure we have production capabilities to support our systems long term. And so he then stood up a bigger team across the Army that wrote a campaign plan for what the Army should be doing from additive. And so we got a chance to input into that. And it's pretty huge, like the way that all shifted. And that continues today. If you talk to Jim Zanino on the Army side, he was my partner in crime for much of that, right? He was driving it from the, execution at the lab level, at the science and technology, organization level. And I was kind of at the headquarters over all of that, helping make it happen. So Rob Carter, who's on my team now, was the Army Research Lab guy that was leading a lot of that. LJ Holmes was involved in it. So there's this community that we still get to interact with today that is doing amazing things that really came out of that early phase of what we were doing on the Army side.
And from your own skill set, as you reflect, and kind of the people that listen to this, as thinking like, hey, like Andy started as a mechanical engineer and then kind of went into some of the strategy and like role and kind of development, thinking about kind of big picture type of stuff. Like, how would you describe some of the key skill sets that you were either able to translate from your engineering time and the learnings at kind of the early days and some of the Army work you were doing? But what were some of those things that you either learned or kind of had to pick up quickly to be successful at kind of that next role that you stayed in for a number of years?
Yeah, I think my dad, like I said, my dad was a welder, right? So he's a blue collar guy, was in the trade for probably close to 35 years. And as I was getting ready to graduate from college with that initial degree, his advice was, don't forget that just because you have a piece of paper saying you're an engineer means you doesn't mean you know anything, right? Like the guy that's operating the machine or that's been working in that trade and doing the work for however long may not have a degree, but he knows that equipment, he knows that process way better than you do. And so that reminder of like, I don't know anything. I might know something, but there's a lot more out there that I don't know than there is than what I do know. And so that I think has shaped me in a lot of ways to come into a conversation not acting like I know everything, because I don't, and it's useless for me to pretend like I do. It doesn't help anybody, myself included, to do that. And so I think that's foundational. That's allowed me to be curious and to ask questions. I had, one of the great lessons that I saw from Adele Radcliffe was her willingness to ask the question. And like if she doesn't know, she just asks. And early on in my young career of showing up and being the Mantech director, which everybody else, by the way, in those positions were 20 years my senior, right? Like I don't even think I was 30 yet when I took over that role, and felt super like ill prepared, super out of, not in the right place, like walking into these meetings. And I saw her in many times talking to people all over the place, just ask what something meant. Like, what does that word mean? What is that acronym? What is that whatever? And that allowed me, it modeled really well for me the ability to just ask the question. And so showing up with like, I don't know everything. Other people around me know a lot more than I do most of the time. And having the courage to ask the question and be clear and not operate on assumptions, I think was probably the two most foundational things. The engineering degree was great. I think the engineering degree allowed me to have a better technical mind, to be able to understand the technical pieces of things. I have said many times that the engineering degree taught me how to solve problems with the resources at hand. It's not gonna. I'm not a super technical deep dive engineer, or I never have been. I appreciate the heck out of people that are. We've got a lot on our team. We've got people that I've worked with over the years that are, and that's fantastic. But I can at least have a general conversation with them because of that engineering degree. I think in that work that I did early on in my career to do some of that technical work. I think having really good mentors is super important, and so having people that have helped me think through problems and reaching out and doing that. I don't know if that's a skill set, but it's a strategy anyway to help drive me in a direction that allowed me to be probably more successful than I would have been otherwise.
And so you're kind of go back to your career path. You've got you're now kind of what 10, 15 years into kind of Army, DoD, kind of government roles. Kind of what was your mindset? I mean, you're kind of more in the private sector now. Was there any transition? Like, what was the transition like to kind of move from some of the government work you were doing to the other side, so to speak?
Yeah, I rolled out of the Mantech program in 2017. I spent about a year and a half with another Army organization, also at Aberdeen. It's the communications engineering organization there. And I was helping build out a new team that was on their sustainment side, so taking care of all the Army's communications and electronics activities. I think with that advanced manufacturing mindset. So how are we going to sustain this stuff, and what's the strategy for that? I thought I was going to be there for a while. I got another email. I have a thread here with emails. So I got another email that said, if you're interested in going to England for a while and being an Army technology advisor, raise your hand. And I raised my hand for that. And so I moved my family over to just outside London for about 2 years.
Which base?
Yeah, we were off base. So
Okay.
there's a facility called Blenheim Crescent, but
Okay.
it's not actually a base. It's more of a small building with a fence around it in the middle of West London.
Nice. The
Yeah,
reason
so
the reason I ask is I did my PhD over in England, and I played baseball on the weekends on Sundays, and the only baseball fields in England are on Army or bases.
yeah,
Mildenhall had a field, and so there were
yeah,
like 3 or 4. So I would do the tour around London of or near London, not really in, but on the weekends taking the trains to play very
That's
low
awesome.
quality baseball in the UK.
Yeah, I think there's a new set of fields now. Some of the families at the school had boys
Yeah.
who play baseball, and so there's some fields locally that I'm not a baseball guy. My brother was based for a little bit in at Lakenheath Heath and Milton Hall up in that
Yep.
area, so
Yep.
familiar based with that area. We were not affiliated with the base, which was actually pretty cool because we were out just on the economy. We had a house in a neighborhood in a village, and it was great. We had to probably like you experienced, we had to establish ourselves as basically residents there. So doctors, banks, grocery stores, all that stuff. It was a fantastic experience. And then COVID happened, and it was less fantastic. And we went from as a family and professionally just traveling and connecting with people all over Europe to not. And but that was really a transitionary period. Getting to your question, that was a transition period for me in that I kind of went into, well, I think even early in my career, like one of the first things that I had to do when I started working for the Army was lay out a set of objectives for time phase objectives, and one of them I remember I can't remember if it was a 1 year or 5 year career point. It was decide if I want to make this a career, if I want to stay in this for the whole thing or not. And so I always had that kind of toying in the back of my brain for that whole period of time. Get to England. My intent really in going to England was, in addition to doing the job that I was there to do and experiencing Europe with my family and all that, was to really put time and thought into do I want to carry on as a career. I was coming up on 20 years as a civilian, which is not a magical number for civilians. It is on the uniform side, but there's nothing magical really at 20 years for that. But it's just an inflection point, or seemed like a reasonable point to think about it. Is what do I want to do? Do I want to stay in? Do I want to not stay in? We came back from England. I spent a year working for the Office of Secretary of Defense within the Industrial Base Policy Office at the helping run the IBAS program. It's the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment program. And so I was back with Adele Reckliffe, who had moved from Mantech to run that program. I was her deputy and CTO for a year. And I really used that to solidify that decision to jump out. And so about halfway through that year, I let her know that I was going to transition out. And I think for me, it was I had incredible adventures within the DoD system, and I'd done just about everything that I never imagined I could do. Right, like I was doing all kinds of things that were just incredible, and I was really curious about what it was like outside the DoD system and what is it like working in industry. There's I think a lot of that question happens on the DoD side, on the civilian side, but it's a lot of fear behind it, and people are like, I'm afraid to leave because of the security, because of the pension, because of all these things, and that's fine. I didn't want to have that be my story, that I was afraid to make a change because I was comfortable in the system and didn't want to go try something new because of that. And so I felt too that being part of that system, you mentioned earlier, it's a huge organization. Yeah, it's massive. Being part of the system, I could do so much, but I felt like I might be able to do more or something differently outside in a smaller entity. The DoD is full of amazing people that have our nation's best interest in mind, and they're hard workers, and they're definitely not all the stereotype that you hear about government employees. I didn't find many of those actually, and but they're a bit handcuffed because of the system that they work in, and they're doing so much because they're asked to do so much. They don't have the time or the expertise in many ways to truly like know what the right answer is. They know there's an answer. They know they got to go in a certain direction. So I felt like I could do maybe more of that on the outside by helping translate some of it. Like, here's what the DoD really needs when they're saying this to businesses that can affect that change. That I could bring solutions back to the DoD and say, here's what you really need. This is the thing that you've been asking for the last however long, and just be in a different, it's still working the same mission set, but in a different perspective on that same mission set. So I was able to make that change. I left the government in 2021, September of 2021, so about a year and a half ago, and now here I am. It's awesome. I love it. It was the right choice.
Yeah. Awesome. And a couple more questions. I mean, I think so. kind of focused on the additive stuff. Like what's exciting about kind of your day-to-day job now? Like what are some of the things that kind of that you've taken from 20 years of kind of cultivating everything from your mechanical engineering degree to strategy, leadership, putting kind of the big puzzle pieces together? Kind of how have you transitioned kind of your skill set to the private sector and some of the exciting things that you're working on?
I still get to connect people. That's my favorite. So I get to connect people and ideas, and I get to straddle a bit of the space in a different way. And so, I'm no longer in the duty system. I don't have the badge that gets me into all the meetings, and that's fine. But I still get to bring value in a different way now to that mission and to that space. And so I think that's huge. I love working with people that are way smarter than me and just learning from them. And I get to do that all the time. That the breadth of the conversations that I get to have is incredible. Spanning from, a small business that has a very niche kind of capability, and they want to just expand into the market and tell people their story, all the way to, how to help the Navy build submarines. And so it's huge, huge span of that. There's no getting bored, that's for sure. I think the ability to be closer to the execution of something, I really appreciate that too, and I'm enjoying that quite a bit. That we're able to bring this expertise and this amazing breadth of capability on our team, and the broader connectivity that we have to the industry into that. I think from an additive standpoint, the industry is continues to grow, but it's, in my view, less about the printers and more about integrating the printers into a broader value chain. And so not getting away from, but shifting the conversation, I guess, from, how big is your printer? What kind of printer do you have? To here's the part that I have, or here's the requirement that I have. Here's the thing that I need to do and make. Can you help me figure out how to make that? And what's the right way to make it? Takes us into a conversation. It's a requirements-based conversation that doesn't have anything to do with, it does have something to do with how you solve that problem eventually, but it's what is the thing need to do? And then we're back to, your question earlier about did working with the polymer printers as a prototyping thing, like, make me think that's the most amazing thing in the world. Like, additive may not be the answer, and that's okay. Let's have that conversation too, and take people down that path. So I love that we at TBGA, and I think, I'm seeing this more in the industry too, is we're less focused on, additive is the answer, and more focused on there's an answer. Let's figure out what that is, and let's go optimize for that.
Awesome. And so one last kind of more fun question I've been asking, or a different take on it. As I was doing some of your research on kind of your background in a little bit, I came across that you like to barbecue and smoke. So can you share a favorite recipe or a favorite item that you like to smoke on the weekends?
Yeah. So I'm super novice. I'll caveat with that. I have a colleague who is like a legit barbecue guy in Texas. I'm not either of those things. So I will always defer to him and his expertise. But one of my favorites, I think, to do is I like to. So I really like pork bellies. I think that's an outcropping of my time in England, that I discovered pork bellies over there. They're super messy. They create a lot of grease, but man, are they good. There's just this like deliciousness that is too good to pass up. So I'll smoke those, and then bring them in and crisp them up on the skillet. I'm a big cast iron skillet guy, so I've got a huge cast iron skillet, and just bring it crisped on that. The other one is I like there's a pork butt that I do. That's a cider brine. You use apple cider vinegar and some other stuff, and you brine it overnight in that, and then inject it a couple times. And whenever you're done, it's just this like super fall apart, super delicious, very moist, amazing pulled pork that I'm a big fan of. So those are probably my two favorite. My back to like process is important, right? Like I always have to remember. I haven't always remembered this. I've had to learn this, to make sure I clean off the drip pan after I do something like a pork belly. Because I have a pellet smoker, so it's one of these like jack of all trade things. So I can smoke on it, or I can grill on it. And if you don't clean off the drip pan before you go grill on it, you end up with a nice inferno, a grease fire inferno. So PSA, clean off the drip pan before you turn up the temperature really high.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much for sharing your story. Be sure to say hi to Andy when you see him next time at a trade show or anything. And excited to see kind of your all the work that you're continuing to do to help serve the country and to kind of continue to bring manufacturing to the next level. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.